Thank you, Shihab, for a nice introduction. So the title of this presentation will be Quasi-Newton Methods for Stochastic Optimization. My name is André. This is a joint work with my collaborators, Professors Spap and Temponi. So, okay. First, I'll talk about the problem that we're trying to solve here. Then I will discuss our method, or quasi-Newton method for stochastic optimization, and show some numerical examples. Okay, so the problem that we're trying to solve here is one of finding the optimum, meaning the argument xi star that minimizes some function. So xi here will be our optimization variables, f will be the objective function that we're trying to minimize, and as I said, xi star is the solution. We're hoping to generate methods that create sequences of iterates xi that converge to xi star in some sense. Now of our interest is the kind of problem where f is given by the expectation of some function here denoted as lowercase f, that is also a function of some random variable here denoted as theta, where even if we don't know the distribution, we assume that we can sample theta from the distribution. And then we have our stochastic optimization problem here in equation 2, where we have the expectation here. Now, we will make some assumptions about our objective function f. We want it to be twice differentiable, first of all, and we also want it to be Lipschitz smooth, meaning that we want its gradient to be Lipschitz continuous. We also assume mu-convexity or strong convexity with a parameter mu, where here it's a stronger form of convexity that in this case gives us lower and upper bounds on the eigenvalues of the Hessian everywhere. So in this situation, we have here this parameter that is very important, this constant kappa that we call the condition number of the problem, which is the ratio of L by mu. Of course, if this function is a quadratic function, this will be the condition number of the Hessian, but in the general case, this is an upper bound of the condition number of the Hessian. So given this, let's look at the gradient descent in the deterministic optimization to motivate why we want to make this quasi-Newton method for stochastic optimization. Well, if we use the gradient descent method with appropriate step size, then we have that the optimality gap, this quantity we want to converge, to be less than tau, requires a number of iterations that is O kappa. So if we have a very large condition number, we will need a very large number of iterations. Now, if we use the Newton method, for example, which can be seen as something like a preconditioning of the gradient by the inverse Hessian, then we get rid of this dependency on kappa, and we have, say, we will have convergence regardless of this condition number. So, okay, computing here D that I'm defining as the Newton step could be expensive, complicated. So in this case, in the deterministic case, it's very common for people to use the quasi-Newton methods, where we use gradient information that we have available and cheap to compute to approximate these Hessian matrices. For example, here I'm presenting the DFP method that can be derived in the following way. Here we are trying to find some matrix P that approximates the Hessian. And to do so, we have to solve this auxiliary optimization problem of minimizing the distance of P from some current approximation of P on this weighted Frobenius sense. We want to try to minimize this distance subject to the constraints of P being symmetric and satisfying the second equation for the last curvature pair. Curvature pair here I call S and Y, which are the difference between the last iterate and Y being the difference of the gradient evaluated. So if we iterate here, we go long enough, B should converge to the true Hessian of the problem. Now, this is all nice, but how does this work on stochastic optimization? Well, it doesn't work, actually, because we will have noise on these gradient observations, and this algorithm cannot deal with it. So what do we do? Well, in stochastic gradient descent method, here denoted in equation 9, we assume that we have this gradient estimate here denoted as upsilon. In this case, we assume that this is an estimate of the mean gradient, but as a placeholder here, we use epsilon because it could be also some other estimate, like Monte Carlo estimate of this expectation, or just something coming from other methods like mice or SVRG and SARA. The later ones are used basically for finite sum problems, a subclass of stochastic optimization problems. And also in this case, in the case where we control the relative statistical error of the gradient estimates here, as in this equation, well, then we also have the O kappa number of iterations. So this is to motivate why do we need also in some cases quasi-Newton methods for stochastic optimization. So let's say that we want to find some matrix P hat that we can use to precondition our gradient estimates and use information that we have, information from difference of iterates and different from gradients, to try to improve the performance of this algorithm, to try to generate sequences of size that converge faster than if we don't use the precondition, especially in cases where we have the large condition number couple. Well, then there are some problems. Let's see 3 of these questions that we need to address. First one is, how do we actually extract the second-order information from these noisy gradient observations? It's not trivial. As I said, if we just plug in the noisy gradient information in the BFGS or DFP formulas for quasi-Newton methods, then they just fail badly and diverge. Now, the other problem that we have is that if we just take stochastic gradient descent and preconditioned by some matrix P, we will have in the direction of the smallest eigenvalue of P, a great amplification of the noise. So say that the smallest eigenvalue here is 10 to the minus 3. We might be amplifying the noise in the direction of this eigenvalue by 10 to the 6. So we have to address the problem of noise amplification in stochastic optimization. And finally, one question is, what if we just, even if we have a good Hessian approximation, is it okay? It's enough to precondition the gradient estimates by this Hessian even if they are noisy? How is the convergence of this algorithm? We will address this soon. Okay, I hope I motivated you. Why do we need to develop quasi-Newton methods for stochastic optimization? Now let's see what we do. What is our approach? Well, the problem that we have is one of deterioration of the performance of stochastic gradient descent and other methods as we get a large condition number. And how do we find an appropriate matrix P hat here that approximates the true gradient and improves the performance of stochastic gradient descent? So let's lay down some notation here. Before we have this yk, the difference of the gradients on subsequent iterates, and the sk, the difference of the iterates themselves. Now, this is what is used on standard deterministic quasi-Newton methods, but in the stochastic case, we do not have access to these y's. Instead, we can only evaluate the gradients of the lowercase f here, which is a function of the random variables theta. So let's define this difference between the gradients evaluated in subsequent iterates as a function of theta here as y hat. And then we can build a Monte Carlo estimator, y bar, using the y hats that will approximate the true y as m goes to infinity here. So how do we use this information? Well, we will use a Bayesian formulation for this problem. First, let us gather the curvature pairs in these sets, y and s. And then we can use Bayes' formula to build a probability distribution of matrices. given these sets S and Y. So to do so, we need to first define a prior distribution for our matrices, incorporating the information that we have a priori, and then building a likelihood of observing the pairs Y and S, given B. We can get a posterior distribution. We don't care about the normalization here because we will maximize this quantity. This is what we do here, denoted in equation 14. So we define this calligraphical L as the negative log posterior, a function that we want to minimize. We want to find the B, matrix B that minimizes calligraphical L. And we also have some extra constraints here about the smallest and the largest eigenvalues of B. They have to be bounded. Here we use this mu hat, which is larger than mu. I will talk about it soon. And we also obviously need the Hessian to be symmetric. Okay. So let's discuss these two distributions that we have to define, the prior and the likelihood, to get the posterior. So to pick the prior, we use the same idea that is used on the deterministic quasi-Newton methods. We have this weighted Frobenius norm that is centered on it's actually the distance in the sense of some matrix P, some candidate matrix P, and the previous information that we had. So what this prior means is it doesn't allow us to move too far away from the previous Hessian that we had in the previous update. And in some sense, it will act as a regularizer in our optimization problem. What other information that we have a priori about our matrices is that they have bounded eigenvalues. And to impose this constraint, we use logarithm barriers on the determinant of this difference, right? So it's quite clear here if we investigate some matrix P, which has an eigenvalue as it gets closer to mu hat here, this determinant will get to 0. And this negative log term here, the log barrier, will go to plus infinity. So this will keep the optimization far from these bounds, or at least not on top of it. So being discussed the prior, we can check the likelihood. What do we do here? Well, we assume this Y bar, Monte Carlo estimates minus the matrix P times S here, this let's say call this a residue, right, of this second equation for this case, to be distributed as a Gaussian. So if we can compute this covariance matrix here, we can also use this information to build the likelihood of observing the pairs S and Y given some matrix P, using this norm with this matrix P, where P is some approximation of the inverse of the covariant matrix, is an approximation of the precision matrix here of Y bar. And here nu is some normalizing constant that we use to not allow this whole thing to blow up too much. Now, this is a good way of building this because we can incorporate all of these different curvature pairs in one likelihood just by summing these quadratic terms here. Okay, we have the prior, we have the likelihood, so we can build our approximation of the posterior, or in this case, the negative log posterior. How do we do so? Here is by, for two parameters, rho and beta, two scalars, we build the likelihood, the posterior here, the negative log posterior, using this negative log likelihood here term, and we weight this proximity term here by rho. This is a parameter that we can control, and we also have the beta multiplied by the log barriers here. So now our problem of finding this matrix is one of minimizing this calligraphical L negative log posterior. And note here that I explicitly parameterize this as a function of beta. And I'll talk about this soon, because the problem is that if we want beta to be very small, but if we get beta very small, this causes us problems. So let us see how do we answer those questions that were laid before. Well, How do we get the Hessian from the noisy gradients? We build the probability distribution using Bayesian inference for a Hessian and pick the map as a Hessian approximation. So how do we avoid amplifying the noise in the gradient estimates? Well, here, let's look at this equation 20 here. Let's take a given matrix and precondition the gradient by it. Well, we can see that we are bound this by this term here, this operator norm of this matrix, and this will be the square of the smallest eigenvalue inverse, right, squared. So since we control the smallest eigenvalue of p hat, we are also controlling how much we are amplifying the noise here on the relative statistical error of our gradient estimate. So also we will be helping a lot the optimization stability here by controlling the smallest eigenvalue of our Hessian approximation b hat.
I'm sorry, can I interrupt? Sorry, Alexander here. Just
okay.
About Q1. I just try to understand, is it solution here unique or?
Yeah, that's a good question, Alex, because I will just step really quickly and show you here that this solution is indeed unique because this problem is not only convex, but strongly convex. So yeah, indeed, it is unique. Right, this is convex. This is also convex on B. And this will be even stronger whole convex.
So do I understand correct that you use maximum likelihood estimation to identify matrix? Yes?
No, we use the maximum of the posterior. We are maximizing the likelihood, but we also have the prior terms here. And this prior term specifically will force it to be strongly convex. So we have a unique solution.
I'm very curious to see it because I did it many times for parameters. So my task was identify, let's say, 3 parameters, 3 numbers. You identify the whole matrix, yes?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I will show some results and then maybe I can hear what you have to say. I know that you work a lot with low rank approximations and this sort of problems, and I hope to hear what you have to say about it, what we're doing here. Let me just go back to this third question here, which is about what happens if we precondition noisy gradients with some matrix, and if this is enough. And we will see this in the numeric session. I hope I get quickly to that. So as I was just telling Alex, we have to, now first we have an optimization problem. Now we have a sub problem in optimization to find this matrix P, and we need to know how to solve this problem. We have some knowledge of its structure. We know that it's convex because here, this is convex. This is also convex. This is clearly convex, but there is references on the book of Professor Boyd on why this is a convex function. It's very interesting. And now this is really good because this makes this term that we have here from the Frobenius norm is whole convex, strongly convex, and this enforces that we have only one unique solution. And also this being strongly convex, we can use something powerful as Newton CG method to solve this problem, to find the matrix P that minimizes this negative log likelihood. So once we find the direction of the Newton direction, we use backtracking Armijo line search to find this matrix. And however, as I said before, we have some problem with this parameter B. If we let beta be large, then we introduce too much bias in this matrix approximation. If it's too small, then the problem gets U-posed. So what we do is use an interior point method path following approach, and we start with a large beta, find the solution, then we decrease beta progressively until we reach a good solution. And here is a short pseudocode of this approach. As I said, we start with some beta. Here we will be decreasing beta by 2, for example, for each I. And then between lines 6 and 9, we have the Newton CG method, where we find some direction D here, where this is the directional derivative of the gradient of the negative log likelihood with respect to B on the direction D. We have this problem of finding the direction D that solves this equation here. And this can be efficiently solved using the conjugate gradient method. And then once we find the direction D, the Newton direction, then we have to find this step size that take us to the minimum, or at least some point that satisfies the Hermitian condition. That is what is here on line 8. So once we iterate here, we find a solution that satisfies the tau. We go back here, decrease beta, and repeat the whole thing. So, okay, very nice, but does it work? Very important question. So let's see some numerical examples here. First, a very simple numerical example, a quadratic function where we have here A will be the Hessian of our problem, right? We want to get B to converge to A, and we want to minimize this function. Note that the way that we build this problem here, we basically have a gradient with some additive noise. So to solve this, we will compare SGD, vanilla SGD, classical one, with the one where we use mice, our method to control the relative statistical error of the gradient. We will compare them with the cases where we precondition them with our Bayesian approximation quasi-Newton method. For the vanilla SGD, we will also test 2 cases, one where we keep the step size fixed, and one where we do the standard Robbins-Monroe approach and decrease the step size. So here, we have this quadratic function with dimension 10, and we have a condition number of 1,000. We can see that SGD in blue is taking 10 million iterations to reach this is the final cost. We run all the methods until we reach the same number of gradient evaluations, so the same cost. We see that if we use mice, we get much faster convergence in terms of number of iterations, at least for the same cost. Maybe don't get as far, but it doesn't wiggle as SGD is wiggling here. And if on top of SGD mice, we also use our approach, our Bayesian Hessian preconditioner, where each update here is denoted as these black squares, we can see really fast convergence in something like 30-something iterations here, which in comparison to 10 million is a good improvement. And also, even we get a bit farther. Now, also it's interesting to note here that in red and in purple, we have the SGD without any variance control on the gradients. And we can see that preconditioning them with our Bayesian approach does not help even decreasing the step size. It wiggles a lot and it doesn't get anywhere. And this highlights the importance of not only controlling, not only using the preconditioning, but if we are to use and try to get something closer to second order information, we need to control also the variance of the gradients. And then on the second case, it's exactly the same, but we increase the condition number to 1 million, and then it gets even more clear that we really need to precondition to get a good convergence. So the methods where we're not using the second order information that just get stuck here, seemingly stuck forever, very low rate of decrease, while when SGD mice get with the Bayesian preconditioner, we get a good convergence here once we learn enough about the Hessian. And similarly, the 2 methods just get stuck wiggling here. Now, okay, of the toy problem, let's look at a more realistic problem where we have finite sums here, and we are trying to train a logistic regression model with L2 regularization to do classification over data, right? We have data points X, and we're trying to classify them. This is binary classification, so we trying to teach it to learn if it's -1 or 1, if it's yes or no, or things like that. For example, this mushrooms data set, it's to identify if mushrooms are poisonous or not poisonous. This one, I don't remember. But anyway, what's important here is that this first problem is one where we believe our method should do well because we have this condition number that is very large, 10 to the 9 of order, but a small number of features, there's a small number of optimization variables. And the second data set has a much larger number of optimization variables and still a reasonably large condition number. So let's see how our methods works on this. So first data set, the coordinate data set with very large condition number, we see a behavior very similar to what I just shown you for the quadratic case, right? So SGD in blue, classical one, and then I have SGD mice in orange, SVRG, and SARA, which are methods that are used for finite sum, control-variate methods for finite sum minimization, very standard, in green and red. And we have their counterparts where we use our Hessian preconditioner in dashed lines with same colors, right? And we can see here that, as in the previous case, they get stuck at some point, walking very slowly after that. And once we start to update the precondition with our method, then the dashed line deviates and keeps converging. And even for SARA and SVRG, it's not as much of an advantage in this case, but still it works. And okay, now this is a bit of a complicated plot. Let me explain to you. Here I have the Newton iterations and the residues for the 4 cases here. Let me go back. We have 4 updates of SGD mice bay. And here I am presenting the convergence of each of these updates happening on iterations 67,000, 147, and so on. Now, here in every case, I have different colors, and they are the different central path following central path approaches. So I have here the tolerance in dashed line. I go here, I start taking Newton steps. After 6 Newton steps here, actually 5, I reach tau. So I increase beta as I decrease beta. I'm sorry. As I decrease beta, my residue grows a bit, but then I continue going and I do so until I reach the final point here where I hope my Hessian is good enough and with a very small beta. So a very small bias given the log barrier terms, if you don't remember. Now, here I'm also presenting on top of each Newton step that I'm taking a black number. And this is the number of conjugate gradient steps that I had to take to find the Newton direction. So I'm starting with the gradient itself as the Newton direction candidate, and I'm doing the conjugate gradient to try to see if it's good enough or not. In some cases, I need to take a few conjugate gradient steps to find the Newton direction. But something that is interesting to note here is that in these 4 cases, none of them took more than 2 seconds, even though it seems a very convoluted approach, right? With the central path, with Newton CG. We are doing conjugate gradient to find matrices. I have done all of this in Python, NumPy, so I cannot even use efficient C or Fortran code to do this. And still, it was quite fast, in my opinion. Even in some cases, you can see here, for example, that it got kind of stuck for some time, but it freed itself and converged and it didn't blow up in time. Now, still, this case was quite ideal. As I said, we have a very large condition number, small number of variables. Let's see the other case, the other data set with 112 design variables, optimization variables, which means that the Hessian that we're trying to find is actually 112 by 112. So what we see here is not as great of an advantage as in the other case, but still quite relevant and similar behavior. As we get here, we update the Hessian. And as we start to precondition, we go quite much faster. And both SARA and SVRG also profit quite well on this preconditioning. Also, maybe I didn't mention, but here to compute these Hessian approximations, we are not sampling anything that we didn't have before. We are just using the information that is already available for STG mice, for SVRG, and SARA, because these methods, they rely on control variates to get a good gradient estimate. So they're always computing gradient differences. What we are doing is taking these gradient differences and feed into our Bayesian approach to get this posterior. So this is, I don't want to say free, but in terms of gradient evaluations, yes, it's free. Now here, it took a bit longer. Of course, this problem has much larger dimensionality. So it's taking roughly 20-something seconds to find these Hessians in each case. But still, what we see here, this is something interesting. Its plot is a bit messy, but if we look at the orange line and the dashed line, we see here that we spend some time computing this Hessian. Once we do, we go really fast until we compute the next one. We have these big jumps. And as I said, this is all preliminary coding. So runtime here is it's much improvable, right? We can try to do this better, and we are working on it. Okay, so now let's conclude. So what we discussed here right now, what I showed to you is this Bayesian approximation to extract second-order information from noisy gradients to develop this quasi-Newton method for stochastic optimization. So we have a prior distribution for our matrix based on the weighted Frobenius norm and log barriers to impose bounds on the eigenvalues. These bounds on the eigenvalues are very important because they stabilize the quasi-Newton method, both by controlling the noise amplification and by avoiding that we take large steps on any direction of the smallest eigenvalue, the eigenvector respective to the smallest eigenvalue of the Hessian, which is even a known problem than deterministic Newton methods, right? So in some sense, this should work better than even if we have the true Hessian to precondition our stochastic optimization methods, because we get more stability by having this control over the smallest eigenvalue of the preconditioning matrix. We developed this likelihood that just uses the gradient averages. We don't need to store all the Monte Carlo data of the curvature pairs. We just need the average of the Y and some information about how precise it is encoded by the precision matrix. In practice, we just use the trace of the covariance matrix, not store the whole precision matrix. And finally, we discussed how to maximize this posterior distribution using the Newton CG method efficiently. And also, it's important to note that this could be used with other methods, mice, SVRG, SARA, and any other first order method that is based on computing gradient differences that you use for stochastic optimization. Now, what we are doing still, we are still working on follow-up for this research on low rank approximations of this matrix, especially for cases where the dimensionality grows larger, because our approach might not be advantageous as the dimensions grows, as we are doing it right now. And also trying to devise a Cholesky factor quasi-Newton method, where instead of updating the matrix, B, we update its Stochastic factor. It would be much easier, for example, to invert when we need to take a step and to get eigenvalues and things like that. Now, also, we have been working on adaptivity on data set here. I mean, the curvature pairs, right? What do we keep? What do we throw away? And on the frequency of update, because right now what we are doing is just taking fixed number of iterations, like every 1,000 iterations, update the Hessian, something like that. And it might be suboptimal, right? We're working on that. And last but not least, we also have been working on line search for stochastic optimization, which would be huge in this case, especially on the perspective of stability, because we have to be quite conservative with our Hessian approximation, because if we allow that small eigenvalue of the matrix to be too small, we might get a crazy step and go diverge, which is a known problem in Newton method, classical Newton method, right? That's why usually people use line search when they use second order methods. So it's a big problem to do this. There are some works being done, but it's still an open problem. And we hope to have this done soon. If you are interested in want to check, you want to test this on problems of your own, it's available. My implementation in Python is available on PyPy. You can install it with pip. And the code and the documentation are also available. This talk was based on this work. It's an archive. It's called Approximating Hessian Matrices Using Bayesian Inference, a New Approach for Quasi-Newton Methods in Stochastic Optimization. And we also discussed these numerical methods, mice, for variance control on stochastic gradient descent, that is available on this preprint here, multi-iteration stochastic optimizers. And SVRG and Sarah were presented on these two other papers from Zhang and Yuan. Okay, thank you very much. That was it.